The test will begin on the word start. On your mark, get ready, start.
Welcome to We Regret to Inform You, a college admissions podcast by students for students. I'm Saad.
I'm Justin.
And I'm Connor.
This week we will be talking about the Common Application and essays, which we are only a month late for. And this week we have Kevin from TexAdmissions on as a guest. So Kevin, go ahead and tell us what you do.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. I know it took us a few months to nail down this appointment time, so I appreciate y'all's patience and flexibility in setting up this phone call. So I'm super happy to be on and contribute to your podcast in the Reddit community. So my name is Kevin Martin, and I am a former undergraduate admissions counselor for the University of Texas at Austin. I worked for 3 admission cycles between 2011 and 2014, and I joined Reddit's Applying to College at the end of 2015, where I was the first moderator brought on by the founder, Steve. And for the past 4 years, I've been helping students independently through my business, TexAdmissions, where I specialize in helping students build their best college applications, specifically with the essays and the resume.
All right, thank you for joining us today. I guess before we get started, what red flags should people avoid with their applications to whole? Because that's sort of something that we try to ask every guest because different viewpoints are always really helpful. So what do you think are some red flags?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think anytime you can frame something in terms of a negative, right? Like so many times people ask, like, how do I write the best essay, or what are the most effective extracurricular activities, or how can I maximize or optimize my SAT subject test? So I think anytime you can frame a question in a negative can really produce some interesting insights. I'm actually working on a book right now that's kind of a compilation of a number of these mistakes that you should avoid. But one thing that I think is just universally the case, whether it's really high achieving students or like kind of mediocre students or those who are not at like resource rich high schools, is they procrastinate, right? Like even at UT Austin, over half of our applications were received between November 15th and the December 1st deadline, and something like a third of those came between Thanksgiving and December 1st. And so even the most high achieving students were submitting oftentimes like their first drafts, hastily submitted applications. I also see students who get really discouraged, and it can be a little upsetting. Like if you have your a GPA or class rank or test scores that are within kind of the middle 50% of a university's profile, don't get discouraged by the students, especially online or in class, who are boasting about their accomplishments or SAT scores. Instead, I think students should focus on building their own best applications rather than worrying about what everybody else is doing or what they perceive everyone else to be doing. I find even on online communities, like students have a tendency to inflate their own credentials. I think a lot of students also underestimate the essay process. You really have to trust in the process. And for me, like with my clients, for example, it takes us usually a minimum of a month to get essays from brainstorming through to first draft, multiple rounds of revision until the end of the process. And so reviewers can immediately tell like red flags whenever students are making just kind of easy grammatical mistakes that you could correct if even just you yourself had reread it, or if you had enlisted an editor to help you out. But I think a lot of the red flags come when students are not being intentional about where they're applying. They're not being conscientious in their dealings with admissions professionals. Admissions counselors, high school counselors want to be treated like people, just like you guys. And this process can be, super discouraging and a lot of times not very transparent. And so, we can tell when students are, not acting with authenticity and sincerity. And it goes back to this cliche to like be yourself, but when it's actually practiced, the students who are interested and passionate and not trying to fake their applications or be something that they're not. We can tell that in the applications. We can tell that whenever we're working with students at a college fair or a high school visit. And so I think anytime you frame these negative questions about what to avoid, one way to kind of positively spin it is just say, put forward your best effort, apply to universities where you have a realistic shot of getting in based on your academics, and keep an open mind and don't get fixated on one school and create unrealistic expectations for your college admissions results in the spring.
Okay, so I think part of what you said there was that you should just be yourself and all this, you know. But I read a post yesterday where somebody was like, "What if my real self is somebody who's lazy and disinterested and just is going to college because it's the next step?" What do you recommend that those students do? Or
I think I think I saw that post on the front page. Let me pull it up so I can address the content specifically. I think it's also about modifying expectations, right? Like if you are a student who's admittedly like, and I think that takes a lot of self-awareness, first of all, right? So if someone is saying like, I'm just like a little bit lazy, or I just have a hard time getting motivated or procrastinating, like that's honestly a lot further ahead than most people who are kind of very unaware of their own areas for improvement. Like, that's one quality I look for in my own personal friendships, for example, is people who are just honest with themselves. I think if you're a student who believes this about yourself, and that like we all kind of share this feeling that, okay, college is just like the thing that you have to do. I think if a student wants to be even self-aware in their essays and discuss these things, you always frame it as a positive and look at college as an opportunity to kind of reconstitute your identity, or discover who you are, right? Like I think the cliche, or the nugget of truth to this cliche of be yourself, is just because, like I mentioned before, like so much of this process is just like students, kind of understandably so, putting on this mask and presenting these applications for who they think colleges want them to be rather than who they are. And yeah, so I think just be real, like keep it real, honestly, and you're going to be further ahead than like 99% of people. Um, so I think it's cool that someone even admits that, especially on a public forum, you know?
yeah, yeah. Well, hopefully they listen to this and get some help out of it, you know.
Yep. So the common application requires one essay to submit. Well, assuming the college requires a common application essay, it's one essay. You get 7 prompts. It's a maximum 700 words, I think.
650.
I think it's 650.
650. Okay. So, and then every school, well, most schools usually have a supplemental essay requirement, maybe 1 or 2 essays that are like 350 to 500 words. So, what are the essay requirements for UT Austin?
So UT Austin requires the Applied Texas application. They've also, starting this year, accept the Coalition application, which I think is accepted by about 60 or 70 universities nationwide. A lot of the public flagship schools have joined onto Coalition. So that's another tool in a student's toolkit, particularly for out-of-state students who may only be applying to the University of Texas at Austin. The Coalition application could be an effective choice. Regardless of whether a student chooses Applied Texas or Coalition, the writing requirements are the same. So there's a long essay of about between 500, I think the maximum is 750 words. It's the topic is describe the environment in which you were raised, and it gives the student the opportunity to talk about their home environment, their family, their school, community, etc. And UT Austin also requires every applicant to submit 3 short answers. Those short answers are 250 to 300 words, and they require students to discuss their career ambitions, discuss anything relevant to their academic transcript, and then finally discuss any leadership activities that they've committed themselves to, and also how they see themselves as a leader on UT Austin's campus.
Now, this is a pretty general question, but what topics or general flaws would you say that people should avoid, either in these specific essays or just in a general personal statement, rather?
Sure. I think each admissions professional is going to take a different view on this. I know one of my colleagues, for example, has a pretty narrow range of what she says are sort of permissible or appropriate college admissions topics. Like she excludes like a pretty wide range of things. And I can understand the logic for cautioning students about discussing like trips abroad or service or sports. But in reality, I feel like how you write and why you write matters a lot more than what you write. And I think just about any topic can be very well written, presenting multidimensional aspects to your identity or your interests. And so I take a pretty broad range. I would say probably avoid national politics, right? Like just stay
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
away from Trump, stay away from Congress, stay away from even like Black Lives Matter, the gun stuff. I mean, I think the only time it's appropriate to discuss politics is if it's a local issue that you are actively contributing or advocating on behalf of or finding a solution towards. And sometimes these local community issues can in fact like relate to national conversations, but I don't think you should ever discuss like a national or even an international problem unless you have a direct experience or relevance to that
So
question.
something like park funding. So something like park funding might be okay, but like funding to make a new park, but not, we need to do something that's more politically charged. Is kind of like what you're saying, right?
Yeah,
Sure, right.
Yeah.
I think it's reasonable, for example, for a student to, like there was an essay I read for an example where a student created or advocated on behalf of their city to allocate the funding and distribute contracts to make bike lanes in their community. And it was cool. So they had this like bike lane project. They were riding their bike to school. They got their friends to ride their bike to school. They organized community bike rides. There was some kind of charity fundraisers associated with it. And then they tied it into this larger context of global warming and climate change. So they said, okay, it's like I'm doing this one tiny part to get a few less cars on the road, to create a sense of community and raise, a little bit of money for an important issue locally. And so I think it can be appropriate to tie it into larger themes. For in the example of a student who's helping plant trees or allocate like neglected public spaces to repurpose as a community garden or a park. They could also tie it into their like a future major of interest if they want to study agriculture or have an interest in environmental science or agricultural engineering. There's ways that you can tie these local things that might be part of a larger conversation, and in turn that will make your essay like genuine and sincere. It's like, oh, I saw a problem, I've come to some solutions, and here's how it kind of contributes to me being a better local citizen and global member of our community.
So in general, you would say then write more about your own activism than just a general sense of pessimism, and you should try to tie in your own experiences rather than just grievances that you have against whatever systems that you live in.
Yeah, I think this is one thing I see in my own life. So I spend a lot of my time outside of the United States, and I meet other people who are also living outside of their home countries, and they make a lot of criticisms about like what they perceive to be as global capitalism or just like working in the professional world and all of these like kind of like visible legitimate criticisms and ills that they perceive in their own lives and in society. And then the question is always like, so what are you doing about it in your own life, right? Like if you have a really long commute to work and you've quit your job and like you don't want to go back to your industry, well, like what are you doing as an alternative? Like how are you filling your life with things that are nourishing or meaningful or purposeful? And so I think anytime, and it even goes back to the question about the student who posted about being unmotivated and not being their true self. I think if you frame things proactively, affirmatively, and as like areas for improvement or constructive criticism, that entails that if you're making an indictment against a systemic level problem, then what are you doing to remedy that illness?
Yeah, I think that answer is really, really relevant to one of the common application essay prompts, which is, I think, number 4. Describe a problem you've solved or a problem you'd like to solve.
Yeah, I think that can be a really powerful prompt if you know how to use it properly.
Yeah, and if you don't, it could absolutely destroy you.
Yeah, you don't want to be pessimistic, of course. So, we've talked about the bigger things that can ruin an essay, kind of the big ideas and stuff, but is there something small that can leave just like a bad taste in your mouth overall? Like perhaps cursing or something like that we should avoid trying to do?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up because there are these big picture questions, and then there are the smaller paragraph by paragraph, sentence by sentence issues of just literally constructing an essay and presenting your ideas. I think I'll say two places I see students really stumble. The first one is discussing service and volunteering. I think that I don't know if it's like a chicken or the egg thing, like, because there's a lot of, especially independent, prestigious high schools that require students to have a certain number of service hours. And so it's pretty common nowadays to see resumes where students have 2 and 3 and 4 and 500, 1,000 service hours, and they maybe even created their own NGO or charity or something. But the language that I see students do it all the time. It can be really paternalistic, really just like kind of condescending.
Oh my
this like
gosh. Yeah.
what we would call in like the 19th century this kind of white savior missionary, like I'm the like kid that's going to help like the students of color in the inner city like see the light of needing to do well in school. I'll actually give you an example. Whenever I worked for UT, we would do essay training. So one week in August, we actually, they're probably doing this right now, is we just train on how to like review and score applications. And they plucked one essay from the previous year that just became like the running joke of the whole school year. It was a student in the Northeast. They were I don't know like Northeast geography too well, but they were like I think somewhere in upstate New Jersey or
Oh
something, and
my
they were like
god.
clearly from like an affluent white background, and
Uh-huh.
so like their brilliant nonprofit idea, they created their own nonprofit to teach like polo to like inner city black kids from like Newark. And
With
so
what
it just
horses?
yeah, it was this like 30-minute joke where we're just like trying to imagine these really, really well-meaning white people going into like rough parts of town and like putting a bunch of like shaving kids' legs and like just sliding them into leather pants and then putting them on top of horses to like hit a ball around, which is like a
Oh my
direct
god.
like a direct like relationship to like British colonialism when polo was like the like most privileged of privileged activities. And I don't know, like even on the other end, there's ways you could sort of rationalize what the student was doing. And it wasn't even so much that like they had this like quirky polo idea that they actually implemented in some minor way, but it was just the language associated with it was just like cringe. It was just cringeworthy.
It also
And
doesn't help that they seem so unself-aware that they're like, all these kids definitely want to learn polo.
Yeah, how did they defend the
yeah,
decision to
just
teach these kids polo of all things?
yeah, I'm just like, well, it was just like perplexing. I mean, even in a minor way, there's some like efforts to teach like golf and tennis to inner city students. And like, okay, that's cool. I mean, it's not the super resource intensive activity where you need like a lot of land and like a freaking animal to like. I'm from Texas
Yeah,
and
imagine.
I've never rode a horse. You
Yeah,
know?
imagine how many resources it would take to teach a bunch of kids water polo, and what you could do with all of that.
Yeah, even no, this is
If you
polo
were
with the
just
horses.
like-
Like this
Yeah,
is like
this is horse
this is
polo.
like the horse polo.
That's even more. Yeah.
Yeah.
Imagine everything
It's
you
like-
could have done with
It's by
all of that
1,000
time
kids.
and money.
It's by 1,000 kids' horses, so they can pay polo.
Yeah, it was just
Anyways.
preposterous. But then so there's this like language of service, which I think so when I work with my clients, for example, like you can write really good essays about service, but you have to be really careful because this is an intersection with race and identity and gender and resources and socioeconomics and urban and rural and foreign, domestic. Like there's all these different complicated intersections of identity that you have to be sensitive about, and like understanding that your audience a lot of times is probably going to be a woman. Like college admissions is majority female. Like there's a large representation of people of color. You have a number of people that don't identify with their gender or as heterosexual, and so like you have to be careful with the language you use, um, or at least be like aware of the larger context in which you're writing. The second thing I see students mess up on a lot is when it comes to social media technology. They use this kind of like college applications should be in the first person, right? Like you should say like I and me and we and us.
Don't
and
pull
like
a don't pull a Julius Caesar and say I or Justin did this and Justin then that would be funny.
yeah, or like, oh, like all of my friends use Snapchat and like they all post like, I don't know, like stupid photos on social media and like people get lost on YouTube. And it's just like, why don't you talk about your own social media habits, technology consumption, what your relationship is with your smartphone or tablet or Netflix, instead of externalizing a problem, like just discuss it as like not mental illness, for example, is an abstract thing, like it's something that's out there. But if you're choosing to write about a topic, and I think some people would say avoid social media conversations entirely, but it should always be like at the end of the day, kind of about yourself, right? Like it's this kind of narcissistic writing style of American college admissions, but that's the reality of things. So I see students trip up on social media technology a lot. So either avoid talking about it at all, or if you choose to talk about it again, just like with service, be very careful with the language that you're using. Um, and it should be kind of collaborative or something where you are kind of a participant in the story.
You just don't want to come off as mean, basically.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like don't same like even with the curse, like you mentioned, or like I think some students ask about cursing. Again, I think that like a well-placed curse word in an essay can be really effective. I deploy that occasionally in my own writing. I think even in my book, I use like a couple of cuss words. I think it can be appropriate. I don't think that like cursing should just be used for shock value or even like in the stand-up comedy world. It can be appropriate, but it needs to be well placed, intentional, and specific. And usually, if there's not alternative words that can convey a similar tone or power or emphasis, then I think cussing can be appropriate. But I think if you ever use a cuss word, especially something that's like beyond like hell or damn or something, then you should have someone else read it and see if you're on track.
Yeah, you don't want to come off as somebody who doesn't have a large enough vocabulary where they can't use any other word.
Yeah, something like that, right?
So, are there any especially memorable essays you can tell us about that you've read
Maybe in
from
a
your
good way.
clients?
Good memorable essays.
Yeah.
To contrast the
Yeah,
bad one.
not I taught kids water polo.
I taught
Horse
kids how to
polo.
horse polo. Yeah.
Oh, it was horse polo. Okay.
Yeah, I'll give two. No, I'll give three answers. The first one is a good example of a student who just did something cool. It was a student, and this was when I worked for UT Austin. I reviewed the student's application, and actually, I rewarded them with the highest score. It just at the conclusion of the essay, it made me think like this is like a pretty cool student. Like this is a pretty well-adjusted young man. Like I think that they would do really well on UT's campus. Like they're mature. They've in Common App language identified a problem, found a solution, and like have gone about things in a pretty cool way, right? Like that's what reviewers are looking for. They just think, oh, this sounds like an interesting person I'd like to talk with for 5 or 10 minutes, like outside of a college admissions context. And the reason I felt this way about this student is they were from like a smaller school in East Texas, like not a large school. They were really involved in their church. They played like guitar. They were involved in like the music scene in their community, and they played varsity baseball, right? So it's like a common thing in Texas, like people play baseball growing up. And like a lot of students in Texas, like they went on their mission trip abroad. So this was kind of a service oriented essay. And one of the communities that they went to, I guess that there was a baseball field that like the local community had built. It wasn't even like a church thing or a Western thing. So there was like a baseball field that was being used, right? So it wasn't like a development project where like they're just making a schoolhouse that nobody uses, but there was this kind of baseball field, and there was like kids that wanted to play baseball and they didn't have bats and balls and gloves, and they were just using like whatever they could find. So the student goes back and he like got a considerable amount of like sporting goods, just kind of newer or like gently used baseball equipment, like from families and businesses in East Texas. They had a contact down in Houston in the shipping world, and they put a shipping container's worth of sports equipment onto the boat, and they shipped the thing down to Guatemala. And then the family went to the port and like personally escorted or helped escort the shipping the sporting supplies down to this community. That the word sort of got out, and then they went back in subsequent summers and helped make baseball fields in like other parts of the region where the initial one took place at. And so the student just wrote an essay. He's like, yeah, like I went on this mission trip or whatever when I was 14. Like there was a lot of like I was playing baseball with some kids, like they didn't have good equipment, so I thought maybe I'd see what I can do. Rounded up a bunch of stuff, and then kind of like did things in a sustainable way. Like continued going back and visiting the community. They even spent like a month or two. It wasn't even like a 1 week deal during spring break. Like it just seemed like that they, were trying their best.
Like they actually cared.
Yeah, it was like, okay, this is like pretty genuine, pretty sincere. Like this is a kid from like not from the suburbs that isn't in this like crazy college admissions world. They were just like doing this because it seemed like the right thing to do, which I thought that was neat.
It's awesome.
The second, yeah, it was just cool. It was again, just like, oh, this sounds like a neat dude. The second essay is probably my favorite essay like of all time to work on. I talk about it in my book. I think I recreated this essay in a recent blog post on my website, TexAdmissions. And it was a student who wrote an essay about band. And in that conversation of top topics to avoid, some admissions professionals say like, don't talk about band. Like everybody talks about band. There's like 1,000 band essays for every university. But this student, so he wrote about band. I think it's okay to write about band. Like I've worked on a lot of really, really good band, orchestra, choir essays, and he the whole way it started was he mentioned like birds a few times, or like kind of bird verbs or bird language, and I was like, hey man, what do you think we just get really super crazy on this essay and just try and fit in as many bird puns, metaphors, hyperbole, similes, like
Oh
play on
no.
words, just cram in as many stuff as we can related to birds. And he's like, oh, it's funny you mentioned that because my band's senior theme is about birds. Like the theme is like the soaring eagles or something. I don't know. And so we ended up loading this essay, this 650 word essay with about 70 or 80 like bird references.
Jeez.
so, so we
70 or
really,
80 in one 600-word essay?
yeah,
That's
like the
amazing.
entire,
Oh my God.
like the entire, like every time that there was like a verb or an adjective or a comparison, but it was actually like really specific. Like there was a lot of like really good content. You had some like overcoming adversity, like they won like a really big competition. So there was like reasons for it, but I think we ended up like kind of scaling it back to like about 40 or so. Like, so we sort of went really extreme and then kind of found like a happy medium to what ended up being definitely like the craziest essay about band that's like that was submitted to UT Austin that year. It was just a lot of fun. I can just imagine when the reviewer got it, they're reading these like, like dozens and dozens of really boring, uninteresting essays, and then it's like, oh, another band essay, and then just all of a sudden it's just like totally crazy, experimental, unconventional, quirky essay, and I like the student was really on board with it, and yeah, he's a sophomore now, I think, going on junior at UT Austin in the aerospace engineering program, and I'm friends with him on Facebook, and he's actually working on rockets, and so he has all these photos of him like launching rockets, and I'm like, okay, dude, it totally fits into the bird thing because you're helping things fly. He was an
That's
aerospace
awesome.
engineering applicant, so that was how it tied in as well. Where like he's like, like planes and satellites and rockets fly, and like so does our band because we're birds and eagles and whatever. So it was because his academics were a little below average, and so I'm like, dude, you're gonna have to like really have an out of the park essay, and I guess it hopefully helps him get in. But yeah, we can just stick with those two examples if that's cool.
Yeah, that works.
Yeah. I,
Yeah.
I suppose that's a good example. The next question is, how can students prevent their essays from becoming boring while still remaining formal? Or would you say that formality is even a necessity?
Yeah, I think the issue of tone, those are two separate questions. I'll start with the second. So tone is an interesting one. Again, there's a lot of opinions on this. Like I'm honestly like I'm a relatively informal guy. Like even in this conversation, I'm not like stuffy. I try not to be pretentious. I don't come from that background. Like I'm a young person, right? Like I just worked with a student today on one of their drafts, and him and his dad were getting like beat in the game of pickup basketball by a bunch of old guys, and he had in quotations like these old Asians can ball very well, and I'm like, dude, people don't ball very well. They ball hard, bro. Like
They ball
people
well.
ball hard. They say ball hard, like it's
Oh my
cool.
God.
So yeah, so it's like obviously a little informal, but it is something that you can use. Conjunctions like I have can be I've found, for example. Uh, like you guys are like 17, 18, right? Like they're not expecting graduate school, PhD statement of purpose or like medical school letter of intent. Like you can have fun. I mean, these essays I know can be super stressful, and like you're dealing with a bunch of stuff, and a lot of times these essays are personal, but I think the students that can find some way to make this process like a little less dehumanizing and just like a little bit more fun, like that, like some of my favorite essays students have written are about their pets, because like everybody loves their pets. Like I mean, like cute dogs and cats and gerbils and whatever. Um, it's hard to not have fun like talking about your pet dog, right? Um, and those can be very interesting essays. So I think just like having a little bit of fun, like the intention that you're putting into the process will come through in the essays, which ties into the question about how do you kind of be a little more interesting, or like just, I mean, like really this threshold for being interesting is just like so many of these essays are so boring. Like they're just, they're just dispiriting. You read and they just come off as like a Wikipedia article at best, or just poorly, even from like really, really good students that have these exceptional resumes where they're like top 1%, 35 ACT, like talking on their like Reddit posts, like 8 out of 10 on my essays. And I can guarantee you that like most of these students' essays are just really not very good. One very simple trick, I think, to make your essay interesting is, and I do this when I'm working with my clients, is I'll find the most interesting sentence that they've written, whatever it is, and I'll make that the very first sentence of the essay. Like it doesn't matter what it is. Like one sentence I found today is it's happening again, and like that's going to catch a reader's attention when they just, okay, that's like a little different than, let me tell you about my home life, or like there was this one time in class, and it just start with the action. If you can do anything to just pique your reader's attention or like make their eyes just like light up a little bit. I think if you're telling a story, for example, start right in the middle of the action. Like don't ramble, don't have some like lingering introduction where you're waxing about like, your theoretical views on friendship or overcoming adversity. Just like talk directly about a time where you and your friend had a big fight or how you helped
I
solve a
think
problem.
I think people kind of get the wrong idea about what the 650 words is, because I don't know. Something I've noticed is that all of the best essays that I've read, the Costco essay, you can love it or hate it, but it got that girl into a lot of schools. I would say that all the best essays, they're not written like a true story. They're written just the middle part of the story or just the very end of the story, and I think that's what really makes them sound so interesting. It's like you don't have the introduction. I think that's
Yeah,
the really.
exactly. Like just start with like I just lost a game of pickup basketball, or I like the bell rung and I stood up. Like okay, that's cool. You don't have to say like, oh, at my speech and debate competition during my sophomore year, I had some really blah 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 blah. The bell rung and I stood up and I walked to the podium. Like you can just start literally with like as you say, the most interesting moment of action and making that moment of action specific. And that's also I think a lot of students struggle with concluding their essays as well. And if you start with the action in the beginning, you can conclude with a reference to that action at the end. Um, and yeah, that's something I try to do as an editor, is just like pluck out the most interesting thing. Just like start with your best shot, Like don't waste any time. Like don't obscure the critical moment at the very end, right? Because your reader might have lost it, like they might have already lost attention because it's the 100th essay they've read that day, right?
Yeah, I'm going into film, so like knowing how to be a good storyteller is very important to like in my entire career goals and my entire future. And even then, it is kind of hard to figure out a middle ground between like explaining things to the reader and also starting right in the middle of the action.
Yeah, how boring would a movie be if every single movie, except for Star Wars, I guess they get away with this, but if every single movie started with 5 minutes of an introduction screen where it tells you all the backstory, that would be really, really boring. So
Yeah,
make it like
but we also don't want to start Infinity War with the snap.
well, yeah, sure.
It's like
Are
have
we
to find a
keeping that
middle
in?
ground.
Spoiler alert.
Okay.
And even just think like, I think, I don't know how much like students read nowadays. I don't know if like I was reading that, oh, teenagers nowadays are spending more time on their smartphones than in books. It's like, oh, surprise, surprise. But even so, like, I think the most interesting blog posts or investigative journalism pieces, books, short stories, they always start off with something that's a little bit intriguing. There's some aspect of the setting or moment of dialogue or something that just piques your attention and encourages you to continue reading that post. I think something like only like 20% of all posts or things on the internet are read to their completion, and something like more than half of the time people stop reading after they stop scrolling or don't scroll at all. They don't get past the first paragraph or first sentence. And so I think if students can just think about the few times that their own attention has been captured by a piece of writing, um, that can be like, oh, like what do I like to read? And even if you're just mimicking that style, like that's okay. You're only writing a 650 word article. You're not, or essay. You're not writing your autobiography or your like 10-year plan of career ambitions, right? Like you just have to be interesting, like just enough. I think any student, regardless of how like seemingly mundane or typical their life is, can find one or two funny, interesting, surprising, comedic, tragic things that's happened in their life, or even just moments, like singular moments, like getting dumped at prom or whatever, right? Like everyone is like, got their clothes dirty in lunch and like embarrassed themselves or like whatever it is.
Yeah, everybody thinks that their life is boring until they're sitting at a stoplight one day and they're like, man, that experience really sucked. Or, what I did that day was awesome. Because
Yeah,
nobody's life
exactly.
is
That's all
really
it
as boring
takes.
as they think it is.
That's exactly right. Anyone can do that. And yeah, and I've yet to work with a student who's just totally incapable of writing. Like they always finish, like everyone always gets done, and the essays are always really good and like pretty interesting. Even the ones that didn't have a lot of confidence in the beginning, like through the process of taking the essay seriously and just chatting with people, you can come to discover these moments of serendipity or surprise.
All right. Well, I think that just about wraps up our essay discussion. Is there anything else that you want to add about UT Austin applications in general or essays? Anything at all?
I think in general, if you have a word limit space, you should use all of the word limit, especially when it comes to the supplements. So always look at your application as one total whole. So if you have a 650 word essay and three 300 word short answers, you should use all 1,700 of those words to make as convincing of an argument as possible that you're deserving of a space at your selected university or program, how you would contribute to that university, and why they should invest their resources in you as a student, and how you'll help pay that forward in the long run.
Yeah, I think a lot of the issue that happens as far as writing college essays is that throughout all of high school, you've been taught to just write filler in your essays because instead of having a word limit, you have a word minimum. And so now that you have to write all these college essays, it's like, how do I take all my words and bring them down to something this concise to develop my entire personality?
Yeah, it's a great point. I'll just I'll just say like so much of these essays are just bullshit. Like I would say with most first drafts I get, I just remove the introduction, I remove the conclusion. So boom, there's like 200 words that are gone. And like so much of my editing work is encouraging students to make concrete what is vague. So they write these vague, abstract, non-specific things that don't have evidence or examples, and it's just this kind of like meandering stuff. And it's like, no, you need to like be clear about what you're saying, support your examples or characteristics or qualities with examples, and you need to tie that into why it's important. Like every word, every sentence, every paragraph needs to make a difference, and it needs to have a purpose. And just like with chess pieces on a board, every chess piece needs to be doing something, either offensively, defensively, setting up future moves, all with the objective to win, right? To get into your college. And I see so many students underutilizing their raw materials, which is the words themselves. The words are unintentional. The sentences, the paragraphs are just, like you say, just filler. And that's why so many students, I think, don't find success in this process. Or those students that are just like, oh, I applied to 18 schools and have perfect academics and I got denied to all of my reaches. And it's just like, I have a feeling that your essays are probably just a bunch of bullshit, for lack of a better term.
So I do think that just about wraps it up. Do you have any social media or any of your own websites that you want to plug real quick?
I do. So you can find me on Facebook, TexAdmissions. That's TEX space admissions. I also have my website, TexAdmissions.com. And you can find me on YouTube as the UT Admissions Guy. So that's YouTube/C/UT Admissions Guy. And I'm also on Reddit as Blue Light Special. So any of those places I post content, and you're welcome to follow me or reach out directly by email at kevin@texadmissions.com.
Yeah, from personal experience, reach out to Kevin, especially if you want to go to UT. He's got all the information.
Yeah,
And
cool.
just-
Thanks, guys. Thanks for the plug.
Yeah, no problem. And just to plug ourselves a little bit here, The podcast is on Spotify now. So just if you look up We Regret to Inform You on Spotify, it should show up. We're on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, a bunch of things. So
Only took us 4 months to get onto Spotify.
it did take us a while to get on Spotify. It's kind of annoying, but I'm glad that we're there now. All the episodes should be up as of right now. So go check us out.
Yeah, right on, guys. Well, congratulations, and I hope all the best for your project. It's a really cool initiative that you guys are doing.
Thank you. You've been
Thank you for joining
super
us.
helpful today with all of your advice.
Yep, I enjoyed my time. Thanks.
Thank you.